and welcome back to the Inside Loop. My name is Justin, and in today's video we're joined by Lieutenant Colonel Joe Bassi, a retired U.S. Air Force officer with 26 years of active duty service. During his military career, he served 6 years as director of the Joint Typhoon Warning Center in Guam, chief of the Acquisition Meteorology Office at Air Force Space Systems Division, and assistant professor of physics at the U.S. Air Force Academy. After retirement from the active service, Dr. Bassi served as a space policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense while working for the Aerospace Corporation. In addition to his Ph.D., he has graduate degrees in meteorology from Penn State, astrophysics from the University of Colorado, and history from George Washington University. While at GW, he was a NASA Space Grant Research Fellow at the Space Policy Institute. In 2015, Dr. Bassi wrote the book, A Scientific Peek, How Boulder Became a World Center for Space and Atmospheric Science, which was selected as one of the best books in atmospheric sciences for 2015 by Atmospheric Sciences Librarians International. These days, Dr. Bassi is an adjunct lecturer at the University of Texas El Paso, teaching a course in National Security Studies. Thank you for your service to your country and your community. And now our first question comes from Miles.
My name is Miles, I'm 14 years old, and my question has to do with the newest branch of military, Space Force. So my question is, how would you apply for something so new and different, and what kind of training would you need to apply?
I can't answer that question directly because I'm not directly involved in the Space Force. I just observe it from afar as one who has a background in space, who did space things in the Air Force. What I do know is that right now, most of the people going into the Space Force are transitioning from the Air Force. So they're people who are trained and brought up in the Air Force who say, I would like to go to the new Space Force. So that's being done right now. What they're doing for new accessions, I know that cadets from the Air Force Academy, 80 something from the most recent academy class, are going straight into the Space Force. They're not going into the Air Force. They're being commissioned directly into the new U.S. Space Force. So that's an interesting experience for them, having spent 4 years at the Air Force Academy. But that is not unprecedented. For a long time, the Air Force was getting young officers from West Point and the Naval Academy, because at the beginning, there was no Air Force Academy. That was created about 10 years after the Air Force was created in 1947. So many of the officers the Air Force was getting was actually coming from the Army and Navy. So that was a longer answer to how you get in. In terms of education, just like with the Air Force, the Space Force is very technical. So I wouldn't rule out that you could get into the Space Force with a history degree, but a degree in engineering or physics or some science would probably make you more liable to have a good career in the new Space Force. And of course, with an emphasis in space things. That's the whole point of the Space Force, right? So in my case, I was never in the Space Force. I retired 20 years ago, but I was in the part of the Air Force that does a lot of space things. And my background in the Air Force was heavily technical. So I had a bachelor's degree in physics. I was in Air Force ROTC. They paid for my undergraduate education. I assume the new Space Force will too, when it will have scholarships available once it gets rolling, so to speak. And then the Air Force sent me back twice for degrees in physics-related disciplines. And in between my assignments where I was doing space-related things or teaching at the Air Force Academy. And so at the Air Force Academy, I taught space physics and I taught astronomy and physics. So in general, I think a technical background, by the way, computers too, that sort of discipline, I think will be in demand in the new Space Force. So I think that kind of covers the question. What do you think?
No, that covers it completely. But to elaborate, most people don't really know what the Space Force even is trying to accomplish, because in everybody's minds, the Air Force kind of took that sort of responsibility for, defense purposes, and NASA takes this sort of exploration and scientific discovery sort of angle of space exploration. So what is Space Force actually supposed to be doing at the moment?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question by backing up. After just quick personal note, biographical note, after I had my technical career, I went into history and policy. So I'm actually going to come at this question in part historically. In the 20th century, a number of times technological developments have required some sort of fragmentation of existing military structures. So what am I talking about? In 1914, right, the airplane was invented by the Wright brothers, as we understand airplanes, in 1903. In 1914, 10 years later, in Britain, there was a move at the beginning of World War I to actually create a separate Air Force, what eventually will become the Royal Air Force. Now, why were they thinking that? They were thinking that because of technological development, this airplane thing, and when I give talks on this, the airplane things I show are basically crates with wings and lawnmower kind of engines, right? That early on, people realized that this was a new domain and that it needed new organizational structures. It needed people with different kinds of training that then the Army could supply. Come to today, most of my Air Force career was space stuff, but was in an Air Force that was basically an Air Force, airplane centric. Space has evolved enough in the last 40, 50 years where there's been more and more of a realization, and it's not like overnight, it's not just this administration, it's been bubbling for at least 40 years, that there needed to be a new service to address the technological demands that military space required. The proper training for officers, the proper development for officers and enlisted, the focus on space systems, not air and space systems. There was one, I don't want to say criticism, but observation maybe is better, that for lots of people in the Air Force who were pilots, they saw space as important, but as an augment to airplane things. That is true. However, you want a structure where space is important in and of itself, not as just an augment to the Air Force or the Army or the Navy. So that was the policy logic in creating a new service. So ultimately, back to the beginning of my spiel, it was driven by the technological shifts required to think about space and the organizational structures to support those new technologies and new regimes of operation. So just the way it was thought, eventually an Army person, no matter how dedicated they are, really can't spend a lot of time thinking about airplanes. Airplane people, as dedicated and as smart as they are not really trained and have the mindset to think about space operations in and of its own sphere. So that was really the logic. And as I say, it really started in 1982 with the creation of Air Force Space Command. And some of us would say that's taken too long for this to happen. But as one on the sidelines, I'm happy it happened. I understand that there are issues with this, that it's not, there are bureaucratic issues, there's budgetary issues. It's not a panacea, but just the way creating the Air Force in 47 was an important thing to do, I think creating the Air Force in 2019, Space Force, sorry, is an important thing, and kind of recognizing the technological realities.
Well, that about wraps up our latest episode of The Inside Loop. My name is Justin. It's been a thrill having you along for the ride. And please, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. It helps us get this great content out there for more people to see. And please support the museum as well. That is the Flying Leatherneck's Aviation Museum. And when we open soon, please stop by and say hello. We'd love to have you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.